Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other like-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
This is so exciting to have legendary and local UFO investigator Stan Gordon with us tonight. He has a relatively new book, Creepy Cryptids and Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania, to review. We'll be also getting into his Silent Invasion. Stan has several upcoming appearances and had one last weekend too. We can hear about that one in from the Uniontown, Pennsylvania area. And if you want to learn more about the latest on Stan, his website is stangordon.info. Should have had the green room talk as the show. That was actually really interesting. Hi, Stan. How are you?
Oh, well, good, Mark. Thanks for having me on the program tonight.
Yeah, I just enjoyed. You gave, you and Barbara gave me more questions about the Hillsdale and Eastern Michigan UFO sighting of 1966. I don't know, how Barbara saw that since she's only 29, but I think we'd probably tie in like a wave of UFOs that you document in Silent Invasion. But we'll get to that. Okay, so you made a name for yourself at a young age with the Kecksburg Incident, and you and Giorgio filmed at the site for Ancient Aliens. Okay, so that was the crash site?
I be honest with you, I've done so many shows over the years, and I know we're in the Kecksburg area. I do not recall going down to the site. I could be wrong. People don't realize it did not fall in Kecksburg. It fell on the outskirts of Kecksburg. And I think this is kind of interesting. It took years and years to find any government documents on this incident. And finally, it was mid-1980, about 1985, that a research associate of mine, Ray Boucher, did a FOIA request, and we finally found the records on the incident. But it's not under Kecksburg. It was under Acme, Pennsylvania. And I believe the reason is because a family that I knew that I had interviewed was also interviewed at the time by an Air Force officer. They lived within walking distance of where the object fell, but they had an Acme mailing address, and that's why I believe the Air Force used Acme rather than Kecksburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. So, okay, you straighten that out for us. But how did that incident change you?
Well, it was a case that really started me on my, I guess, search for answers. I was interested in this long before that. I started out in this in 1959 as a 10-year-old kid who was interested in science, electronics. Back in the 50s, I was building crystal radios and listening to radio stations from around the world, and I was one of these kids that was out in the woods gathering insects to look at under my microscope. And it was during, when I was 10 years old, I happened to hear a radio show that was talking about strange and unusual happenings. They were talking about alleged hauntings, flying saucers, strange creatures, and I was curious. I wanted to know, are these people making these stories up, or are they telling the truth? So I began to go to our local Greensburg library and read all the books on the subject. And so I was already interested in UFO topic, and then I was 16 years old in 1965 when the incident happened near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. And I remember that we could talk for days and days about Kecksburg, and there's just so much information over the years, and there's a lot that I've learned even in more recent years, surprisingly. And anyhow, I mean, I can go into it a little bit. I just happened to be listening to a major talk radio show in Pittsburgh on the night this happened. And just to make the story very short, almost the entire program that night was focusing on this breaking news that this brilliant fiery object was seen from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And whatever that object was, it fell near Kecksburg in Westmoreland County, 35, 40 miles from Pittsburgh, depending which way you go. That object came in right over the greater Pittsburgh area at about 4:47 p.m., just as it was getting dark. And the radio stations, the TV, the newspapers, the police departments, they were just jammed with calls of people seeing this thing. Some people thought it was an aircraft that was on fire. And as the evening goes on and the radio show's on, they're reading the breaking wire stories coming across to this object. Witnesses are calling in describing what they saw. And it was an amazing, amazing evening. And then as it got later into the evening, KDK TV, they were breaking in with live reports that the military was now arriving in the Kecksburg area to search for an unidentified flying object. And I wasn't even driving yet, and I had no way to get out there, but I'm documenting and writing all this information down. I'm running back and forth. In the good old days, we had a black and white TV console, so I'm running from the living room back into another room to listen to the radio updates and gathering all this information. And the next day, the first thing I did, I went to the local newsstand to pick up all the newspapers. I was hoping, boy, I hope this makes the news. And there it was, headlines everywhere. The Pittsburgh Press, the Post-Gazette, our local Greensburg Tribune Review had 2 editions. Its headlines on the front page of the papers. It made local news, national news, and actually some international news. So it was a major, major story. And it was very little information at that time because there was very few names in the paper. I'm from in the city, so they're out in the country, didn't really know many people at all in that general area. But I can tell you over a period of weeks and months and years, I tracked down hundreds of people who were involved. I interviewed police officers who were on the scene, many reporters. This is what's so interesting. You had the reporters from all the Pittsburgh radio and TV stations who became part of the story because they all came out to Kecksburg that night. So a lot of them either interacted with the military or saw military equipment. So I interviewed them, got statements from them. I tracked down multitudes of people who came in from all over the state that night, many different areas after hearing the radio and TV broadcast that a UFO had fallen, and people were coming out there in droves in a small farming community trying to get a look down into the woods to get a look at what this thing was. But there's so much more to the story. What a lot of people did not know at the time, that I found out years later, and it took a lot of work, but I got leads and anonymous tips, and I was able to track down some of these people. So some of the locals that afternoon, about 4:47, again, the Pittsburgh area, some of the locals who saw this thing come down 200 to 300 feet over their heads and go down into the woods, and it came down very slow speed, almost like it was controlled. Well, some of those local people, they ran down into the woods thinking it may be an aircraft on fire, and that's when they came across that large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. This thing is about 10 to 12 feet in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It looked like one solid piece of metal. One witness who stood a few feet away from it was a volunteer fireman, but later he became a machinist. He said it looked like somebody took liquid metal and poured it into an acorn-shaped mold. It was kind of an off-gold bronze color. But what was interesting to the few that were close enough to see it was that on the raised-up back part, like on the acorn, there were these raised-up markings that looked more like some type of ancient symbols than any type of insignia they can recognize. And luckily, one witness who was standing there, because his family background, he was familiar with the Soviet writing. And he said that is positively not what it was. It looked more like some type of ancient symbols. But that's just a very, very short part of the story. There is so much more. There's so much more that people have no idea about. There's some interesting things that I've been told now in the last few years, and it's a very, very interesting story, I can tell you.
Yeah, you mentioned that the glow was reported from Ontario over New York or Ohio, going towards Kecksburg. Are you able to trace where the destination may have been? I've heard people doing that with trying to do that with the Flatwoods Monster, and I think Bashful Billy was this same night. Where are they flying in like parallel lines? Is there a destination
we
where
had
they
a
were
real
headed
good idea.
to?
Yeah, go ahead. You're cutting out on me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just wrapping up with, can we trace part of their route and maybe come up with a plausible destination?
We really can't, because one, we do have a really good idea of the path of the object because we had so many witnesses all along the path. But here's what we found out. This thing came in from Pittsburgh. It came in over the Greensburg area. It moved out to Route 30 east of Greensburg. It made a turn to the south. So people saw this, and it was seen sequentially all along that path, and it went out to the mountains of Laurelville, so a few miles away from Kecksburg. And one witness that ran out in the road and watched that it kind of hesitated and began to turn and began to move back out. It started going back towards the direction of Kecksburg, but not in Kecksburg, on the outside of the Kecksburg. It made another turn and then dropped down into the woods. So it was making definite change in directions and slow descent, and people saw it go down again. They said it looked like it was basically almost controlled. And the interesting thing is the witnesses saw it on the ground, said this thing was completely intact, but it did knock trees down, it did do tree damage, but it was semi-buried in the ground, but it was fully intact.
Oh, okay. How many other cases are there that have some type of symbols or writing on them? Is the Kecksburg, pretty unique in that regard?
No, there's other reports from around the world of alleged crashes. I mean, you had supposedly Rendlesham Forest, you had Aztec, there's Socorro. There's different ones that mention different types of symbols. The problem is this: you had people out there that night, firemen. You saw the locals out there. You had this number of people that came across the object, and they're down there looking for a possible downed aircraft. And they're not equipped. They don't have cameras with them. And a lot of them only saw this, for a very, very short period of time and didn't concentrate on the symbols. They saw them, but just didn't concentrate on them. There were other things going on that night. There's so much we could talk about. Again, I'm just giving the very short part of the story. So it's all from memory. I mean, that's the problem. There's no way you can say for sure what exactly symbols they were, what type of formation they were in, but different people report seeing them, but there's no way to compare it to the other reports because there's no way we can be sure of exactly what they look like.
Cool. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Yeah, we can come back to the Kecksburg incident later in the show, but I also want to do some examples from your creepy cryptids, and I truly enjoyed it. I thought it was well written, great examples. Some of them really keep you glued to the page. What were people seeing? And you're focusing on so many sightings of UFOs and Bigfoot, and other cryptids in the Chestnut Ridge area. For those who aren't familiar with that area, can you explain about where Chestnut Ridge is? A little bit of the geology of the area.
Well, the Chestnut Ridge, it's a really interesting area. It is extremely active year after year, including this year. But the Chestnut Ridge is not one small location. The Chestnut Ridge runs through Westmoreland, Fayette, Indiana County, and southwest Pennsylvania, extends down to a few miles outside of Morgantown, West Virginia. So there have been sightings and history of sightings for years and years all along the ridge. However, there are certain geographical locations, certain properties that the phenomena seems to focus on for whatever reason. Some of these places have a long history of paranormal occurrences, UFO sightings, Bigfoot, other cryptid encounters, strange screams and howls. There's all kind of strange things. And there are some very active areas been around there, but we're also aware of other ones in other parts of the state. There's one that is very, very active, even in recent weeks. I've been up there a few times. It's a very, very spooky area, but I'll tell you, some very credible witnesses and researchers who are up there. It's an undisclosed location, and it's amazing what they've been reporting up there from, again, various cryptid sightings, these small orbs of light very low to the ground coming out of the woods close to people, electromagnetic effects, and in recent months, some of the teams up there have had very high level, very good quality instrumentation. They've been able to document some very strange things while this is going on. And I'm sure in the future you'll be hearing more about it.
Okay. Let's look at a few of the UFO samples from creepy cryptids. You've mentioned Route 30, as the Kecksburg craft was maneuvering. I think you had some other examples flying over Route 30 or near Route 30. What are some of your favorite examples from the Chestnut Ridge area?
Well, there's multitudes of reports, multitudes of them. I mean, from very low-level UFO sightings to orbs of light. But the area, especially around Derry, Pennsylvania, has been an historical hotbed for Bigfoot activity year after year. I can tell you in the last couple of years up in the Ridge area, and actually some other locations too, but that Ridge area, a lot of the Bigfoot sightings now have been in daylight, and quite a number of them been where people are 50, 60 feet away from these things. I remember one good example was about 3 years ago. We were up there. People had a lot of property deep in the woods. They've had this thing, or more than one. They've seen big ones and small ones up there too. And interestingly, these people don't know that other residents around the area are also calling in, telling us about similar things just miles away from them, but these people don't know about the other people reporting them as well, which is very interesting. But now one case, a few years ago, it was very early morning, the sun was just coming up, this woman's walking around on her property, suddenly this 8 to 9 foot tall gray Bigfoot comes walking out of the woods with a deer over its right shoulder. It stops. They have eye contact with each other. It makes a loud grunt when it sees her, and it runs off through the field into the woods and gone. Those are the kind of reports that are coming in, very, very detailed reports. But also around the area around Derry, other areas along the Chestnut Ridge, we've had a history for years of thunderbird sightings. And that's very interesting, too. That's these reports of these very large, huge flying creatures, and it's very involved as well. There's similarities in a lot of the reports, but also some differences. But they're fascinating. I've investigated many of them over the years. I've written about them in several books. But I can tell you, this year we've had a number of incidents with thunderbirds in recent months and early in the year, not just from western PA, but from eastern PA as well. And several of these have been very close range, very low level. We're talking 20, 30 feet over the vehicles, coming way down. People can see the massive wingspans in these things. Most people are telling me that these things have between a 15 to 20-foot wingspan, what they're seeing. And they didn't know. See, I didn't publish any of this information. I'm just beginning to bring a little bit of this out. But for months I did not, because I wanted to see if other people would be reporting, and they were. And there's some similar details that are really intriguing. But here's the thing about the Thunderbird reports. There's different, let's say, classifications of the reports come in. Many of them are just like huge, oversized, dark brown or black birds with major wingspans. And then we have other reports of what appear to be like black, leathery-skinned, like giant bats. Those have been reported for years. And then there's people, again, very responsible, reputable witnesses I've interviewed from all kinds of backgrounds, just like with UFOs and Bigfoot, who swear what they've seen look prehistoric, like a pterodactyl, pterotorn, something like that. And then you get into, even we've had some of these reports of winged humanoid creatures being seen in the Pittsburgh area, up around Butler, PA, back in 2011, what they call the Butler Gargoyle. So there's all kinds of things that go on, and that's just a small example of some of the cases in there. But, and again, while there's a lot of activity up around the Ridge area, you asked about Route 30. So Route 30 is a major highway that goes through the Pittsburgh area. And I can tell you this, even in recent months, there's been some very active activity. This past April, we had 3 low-level daylight sightings. 2 were over the Irwin, North Huntington area, very low level over the business district of these very large cylindrical objects, no sound, wingless, no wings on these things, just hovering, and in most cases just vanishing. I've interviewed multitudes of witnesses. We've had reports on these things in other areas, even in the last week or two, from different areas. We've had reports for years of these things. I've been investigating since the 1970s. The government has called them Tic Tacs. One witness said to me, it looked like a good and plenty candy. I thought that was even a better description. And some of these reports are very intriguing. We have a number of photographs that have been taken from different parts of the state. If you go through my website, you'll see some photographs of them. We got a pretty good picture of one even high altitude, I think it was about 2 weeks ago in Cambria County. And so that's fascinating as well. But one of my favorite reports from Route 30, and I've investigated many, one of the earliest ones I can think about was in August 1966 on Route 30 by the Adamsburg Cutoff. And these 2 women are riding down the road coming up to the area of the Adamsburg Cutoff, where there was a big 500 kV power tower. And as they're getting closer, they see something kind of luminous and flickering above the power lines, and it's dropping below the power lines. And as they're getting closer, this thing suddenly moves from the power line, comes directly towards them over Route 30. They were in a sports car, convertible sports car, top down, and this thing came so close to them, over top of them, they ducked their heads because they thought it was going to hit them. It was a long metallic cylindrical object. As soon as they got home, they called the state police. That was the first report I can think of going back to the 60s that I investigated. But one of the more interesting ones I investigated was June 1st, 2013. And this was also on Route 30. So here's a woman who did not believe in UFOs. Well, now she does, and she had a 3-year-old child with her. And it was like 10:05, around 10 o'clock in the evening. She was coming out of a convenience store, heading eastbound on Route 30. And I remember when I was interviewing, she said, I couldn't believe it. There's cars way ahead of me, cars way behind me, and nobody's near me to see this thing. She's riding down Route 30. She's on her telephone, and suddenly she has to brake right in the middle of the 4-lane highway because here's this object that's hovering very low above the highway. And her 3-year-old child yells, "Mommy, flying iPad in the sky." Pretty interesting. And anyhow, as she's riding down the road, she stopped on the highway because this thing's right there hovering. It's about 150 feet away initially, but she gets much closer. But she said this thing's hovering about 60 feet above the highway, as I recall. It looked mostly rectangular. She said it looked like the gondola of a blimp without the blimp part. But it had 2 rows of lights, which was completely unlike navigational lighting. It made no sound. She said this thing was about 55 feet in length, about 35 to 40 feet tall, and it's taken up all 4 lanes of the highway. And anyhow, she had to go underneath this thing to get home. So she's on her cell phone, and she's telling the person on the phone what she's seeing. So she passes underneath the object. When she does, all the digital displays on the dash of her car go out. The clock, temperature, airbag status, the radio station she was listening to, she lost the radio signal, the Bluetooth connection wouldn't work. She tries to take a picture with her camera phone. It would not let her go into the photo mode. And as she goes down the road, she passes under, goes down the road about a quarter mile away, all electronics come back on. So we're hearing more and more reports of these EM electromagnetic effects going on for years with these type of things. You don't hear about those cases very often, but this stuff is still going on. And actually, if you go to my website and you can read it, there's a very interesting report. There was a very significant daylight UFO incident in Fayette County, which continues to be one of the most active areas in the country, especially along the Chestnut Ridge area here in southwest PA. There was a significant incident, I believe it was July 2nd. Don't have the report right in front of me. But you had 2 vehicles. This was beautiful morning, around 11 o'clock in the morning, as I recall. One of my research associates, Jim Brown, who's a real high-tech guy, he investigated the incident. And actually, he got out there as the episode was still ongoing somewhat because these 2 cars, one behind the other, both stall out on the highway as this very large cylindrical object moves about 300 feet over their vehicles. It's a very, very intriguing case.
Okay. With your lifelong interest in electronics, do you have an explanation for why the car radio, her cell phone, everything just fails all of a sudden with no prior indication that something was going wrong?
Well, first of all, historically, these cases are well known, going back to the late 40s, 50s in particular, where there were a lot of reports in UFO history of these large metallic objects hovering near vehicles, and when they were close by, the headlights begin to dim, the power would begin to sputter. When the object took off, the power came back on, the headlights got bright again. Those cases were pretty common over the years. You don't hear about them as much, but yes, I do get some of those reports, and some of them are very, very fascinating. One of my favorite reports was September 3rd, 1987, also on Route 30. This was closer to where I live, and I should tell you this now because I don't think I mentioned this earlier. You know, I've been doing this now going on 65 years. I have never personally seen a UFO or a Bigfoot. I've interviewed thousands of UFO witnesses and hundreds of Bigfoot and cryptid witnesses. I deal with these cases really almost every day. I've had incidents come in today and one this evening. And My hotline's been open since 1969. It never stops ringing. I get multitudes of email and phone reports coming in all the time with current or past reports. And I can tell you it's very, very active. In past weeks and months, it's very active.
Is there an explanation for why Chestnut Ridge is a hotspot for all types of activity?
You know, we have looked into that for years and years. Here's a pattern I found, which fits in the Chestnut Ridge, but also many other areas. Pattern I found many years ago is this: many close-range, low-level UFO sightings. So we're not talking just lights in the sky. We're talking large structured objects. I can give you many examples where people see them at very close-range, low-level. And also incidents where Bigfoot and other cryptids are seen at close observation at times. They commonly occur in the vicinity of high-energy sources. So you have many incidents around high-tension power lines, power plants, gas wells, gas lines, bodies of water, railroad tracks, and all types of radio communication towers, cell phone, broadcast towers, communication towers, all kind of radio towers. There's a lot of instances around there. Windmill farms, for example. There's definitely an interesting connection with a lot of these reports with energy sources as well.
Okay, so that kind of goes back to, like the nuclear power plants attract
another source of energy, and there are sightings all over Pennsylvania around nuclear plants as well. There's been a history of them over many of the power plants in Pennsylvania, and there was the big power station. One of the big ones in this area was the Homer City Power Station, Indiana County. They unfortunately closed it down last year. But they were building that power plant, I believe it was 1967. While it's under construction, there was a major wave of UFO activity up there. It went on for weeks and weeks. Things hovering over power lines. There were low-level sightings. It was in the newspapers up there for weeks. There was a small UFO club at the University of Indiana up at the college that were investigating the reports. And but I can tell you, after that plant was activated for years and years, we're getting reports of UFO sightings around there, cryptid reports, Bigfoot activity, also some of the other power plants in Indiana County. And, I mean, that's been going on. That was going on, and we're still getting reports, but I don't think we're getting as many as like we did when the power plant was very active. So there was a lot of history in that area, and there continues to be a lot of incidents, especially along the areas along the Chestnut Ridge, but also other areas. So this activity is not just in the ridge. These reports are coming in from all over Pennsylvania. I get a lot of activity from southwest PA, but even eastern parts of the state. I'm getting quite a bit of activity now from northern Pennsylvania up around the New York-Pennsylvania border coming in. I've had reports the last few weeks up in those areas coming in. But I did want to tell you about that case on Route 30. So it was September 3rd, 1987. This was a really interesting case. So this was right in the vicinity of what was in the Green Gate Mall, which is now a Walmart. And it was around 8 o'clock in the evening. You had multiple witnesses, including law enforcement. They see this 300-foot-long cylindrical object, look kind of solid metallic with multiple lights on it. I remember it had a flashing red light on each end, but multiple white lights all through the surface of the object. It was completely silent. It was about 300 feet above the high-tension power lines on what was called Power Line Drive, which is still there. And this thing moved over the power lines, over Route 30. The opposite side of Route 30, you have the Green Gate Apartments, and you had a power substation. As these people are watching this huge object moving horizontally, it suddenly turns vertical in the sky. And when it does, all the power in the area, including the mall, went out. And most of the power came on very quickly, but the annex where the theaters were behind the mall, the power didn't come back on. When the engineers from the power company went out to investigate, they found all three of the master fuses and the circuitry had been blown. That's something that's just unheard of. And they were very concerned over that incident.
Okay, well, in Creepy Cryptids, you have some of these drawings, like the one on page 19. I don't know, it's kind of like star-shaped. You have the cylindrical ones you've mentioned, triangular, boomerang-shaped ones. Something that fell from the sky that looks like a diamond. It's on page 15. So are we seeing the evolution of different types of crafts from the like 1950s saucer-shaped ones?
Well, we still get some kind of disc saucer-shaped things over the years, but in more and more recent years, it's more of these long cylindrical or cigar-shaped objects that are being seen. And again, a lot of the sightings now are in daylight, not at night. And a lot of these are very low level and beautiful afternoons where people are seeing these things, and in many cases just vanishing. But then it gets much more interesting, because over the years I've had reports of large solid objects below the ground that as people are watching them, like from one end, it'll begin to slowly fade away till it's fully gone. But then we've had other incidents where people watch what look like solid object that suddenly physically change from one form into another. And a good example, and again, a lot of this you can find on my website. If you scroll back, there's many, many pages of strange incidents for years going back, and that's just a sample of the reports coming in. But there was an incident last year, again, in Fayette County. I don't have a report in front of me, but I can tell you it was November of last year. It was a beautiful afternoon. It was around 60-some degrees for November, and this lady, it's a rural area, and happened to look outside her neighbor's home, and 50 feet above the neighbor's roof is this very large, solid, black triangular object. But as she's watching it, it's changing from a triangular shape to a square-shaped object, then back to a triangle. So she's watching this for several minutes, and she thought, I better call my neighbor and tell her about this. When she rang her phone, she didn't answer, so she thought, I bet she's outside. So she goes over to the house, and the neighbor's outside in their yard, and had no idea this thing's hovering right over the top of the roof of her home. So they're both watching this thing, and it moved up to about 500 feet in altitude, beautiful day, and they're watching this thing going from the triangle to the square and back to the triangle. It was about 500 feet, then it rises into the sky, and it's gone in a matter of seconds. Those are the kind of things that are going on more and more. And it's just amazing. But I'm telling you, whatever we're dealing with is so complex. It is so bizarre. Nobody understands it. I truly believe the government is very much aware of these things. They don't understand it either. They know what's going on. They're not in control of what's going on for years and years. I can tell you from the research I've done over the years, I said many, many years ago, there appears to be more than one origin to the unknown category of the UFO mystery. I think a very small percentage of these things are probably extraterrestrial. Yes, I believe the government has recovered some of these objects from around the world. But a lot of what we're dealing with is much, much more unusual. With the UFO phenomena and the cryptid phenomena, I found patterns about these things. I started noticing these things back in 1972, and especially 1973, when we had that massive UFO Bigfoot outbreak in Pennsylvania that the book Silent Invasion you mentioned is all about. That's when we began to realize that Bigfoot was much more unusual than an unknown primate, which is something I was not expecting. Because when I was investigating Bigfoot in the 1960s, I was convinced that Bigfoot was an unknown animal, some type of unknown species, until these incidents began to come to our attention. And we can talk about that as well because it's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. You also have a chapter. We can come back to that topic as the show goes on, but you also have a chapter on the mini UFOs. I thought that was really interesting. I don't think we've really had a guest who's gotten into that topic. What what's the story behind the many UFOs that are being seen in the southwestern Pennsylvania area?
Well, yes, it's probably one of the most interesting parts of the phenomenon I've ever dealt with for years and years. It is increasing dramatically, these cases, as recent as today. I got a report early this morning of a security camera footage of one was seen in Westmoreland County. A man sent me the footage, and I just received something in the last 2 hours from another county from somebody else reporting something similar. I think this is one of the most important part of the UFO phenomena, that it's not being discussed as much, but I can tell you, I have no doubt in my mind in the weeks and months ahead you'll be hearing a lot more about this, and it's very important and very unusual. I started dealing with these cases in the 1960s. I was aware of these incidents. Yes, I've called them mini UFOs, and these objects are very intriguing because, one, they are not high in the sky. They're very low on the ground. In fact, I've had reports of them actually on the ground, and they are truly mysterious and very, very strange. I first knew about this in 1972, along what they call Humphrey Road outside of Greensburg, so several miles from where I live. And there was a large wooded area along there, and I began to get reports during the spring and summer of 72 independently from some of the landowners that some strange things were beginning to happen. They were hearing these strange screams and howls in the woods, something bipedal heavy walking in the woods. People had seen a large, wide-shouldered creature chasing dogs. They were finding strange footprints around their property. They were having UFO sightings, but they were also seeing these little tiny orbs or spheres, and very small ones in this case, right around their homes and bushes that they had never seen like it before. And that was fascinating. I'm trying to figure out what the heck's going on with all these strange things being reported together. And then 1973 comes around. So let's go back a little bit so you understand the background. I've been out in the field since Kecksburg in 65 investigating incidents. My hotline's been open since 1969. But when I set up the hotline and people began to hear about it, within 2 or 3 weeks, the phone in my home is just ringing day and night with reports. And people calling in about not just UFOs, anything unusual. Haunted houses, strange sounds, weird creatures, anything unusual, people are calling me. Well, it became apparent very quickly I couldn't handle this all on my own. So I decided I was going to try to organize a volunteer group of research people. So in 1970, that's when I organized the first group, the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. And for years I would have, I had 3 different groups over the years, but 1970 was the first group. And it was just amazing who I got involved. Dr. Hynek would have called it the Invisible College. I had scientists, engineers, technicians, police officers, former military specialists. We all did this around our full-time jobs. And from the Pittsburgh area, I had a lot of really amazing people who worked at, for example, at Alcoa, Gulf, Westinghouse, from colleges and universities. Almost everyone involved did it confidentially, anonymously, because of their positions. And I had some pretty interesting people involved, and some were pretty skeptical until they began to go out in the field with me. They're interviewing witnesses, they're seeing the patterns, they're seeing the evidence we're finding over the years. And some of these people were out there for years in the field with me, and then they began to realize, yeah, there's something going on here. We just don't understand what the heck we're dealing with. And that's what's going on more and more. And 73 was just an amazing time. First, we had the biggest UFO outbreak in history. Went on all year long in Pennsylvania. Hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings. And so you got to remember now, it's 1973. There's no cell phones. There's no internet like today. People had no idea what was going on, except maybe some in their local areas, but they didn't know what people miles away were reporting. So a lot of these people would initially call the police departments or the news media. So we have all these reports come in, UFO sightings, but interestingly back then, a lot of the local, statewide, and even national newspapers were picking up a lot of these reports. So we're out there day and night investigating all these UFO reports, and many of them were low-level UFO sightings. We had things hovering over highways, pacing vehicles. There were landing reports in different counties with some with physical evidence. There were incidents on the turnpike. I mean, the UFO stuff alone was just amazing. But then it got much more interesting. The summer of 1973, we had the biggest outbreak of Bigfoot sightings ever documented, which went into 1974. We have had Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania every year since then. And it was an amazing time. Many of the Bigfoot sightings in 73 were quite close range. Many were in daylight, sometimes more than one creature seen together. So my teams would get out to some of these locations within minutes to hours after they occurred. That's why we could document these things so well. And we were really surprised because we're getting referrals now from the state police, from the news media across the state, and we're just jammed with all these cases coming in. And we could have done it full time. The problem was we're not getting paid doing it. We're just doing it out of our own time and pockets. But we did it, and it was like living a sci-fi movie because of what was going on. But we uncovered a lot of interesting things and things none of us ever expected to be finding out about. Because, again, I was convinced that Bigfoot was an unknown primate. One of the first things that turned up is the footprints. So you have tracks at many locations, which we made many casts over the years, and you have all kind of weather conditions, including snow. So we get out there soon after these things occurred. We have these large tracks, unusual-looking footprints with very large strides between them that would go for a distance and then abruptly just stop when there should be more tracks. And there was no way. I mean, I had an anthropologist in the group. We had forensic people. We had all kind of specialists. There's no way you could have fabricated that. And I can tell you that that's going on all over the country now. Similar kind of reports for years and years all over the country. And then as 73 goes on, the reports get much, much weirder and stranger. And one of the things was that we began to see a pattern. We'd have a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes to hours or days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then it got much more intriguing. That's when we began to have these reports of a Bigfoot and UFO seen together at the same time and place. I'm going to get back to the orb stuff because this fits in. One of the strange reports we didn't realize at the time, and how it fit in later on with these other reports of these strange orbs and spheres of light, is that in September of 73, north of Pittsburgh, there were two witnesses waiting for a friend to pick them up when they see this around 7, 8 foot tall Bigfoot with white hair running across the road, but in one of his hands it's carrying a small glowing ball of light. And as it runs into the woods, an object came across the sky, projected a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. So that was fascinating, but I can go into details of a couple of the most dramatic Bigfoot UFO cases, which will take a few minutes. They're very detailed. They're very, very interesting. That's when we began to realize that Bigfoot was not just some type of unknown primate. It's something much stranger. And even though I don't like to talk about it that much, but I'm talking more and more because more people are talking about it now. I was reluctant for years because it's so strange, but people now are more acceptable to it. Whatever we're dealing with appears to have a physical and an unphysical component to it. And for a lack of a better term, I'll say that a lot of these things it's something interdimensional. And it's interesting because some of the UFOs people reporting are the same thing. They appear, they disappear, they change form. With the Bigfoot cases, we're finding this more and more really strange things going on with the Bigfoot reports. You know, while you got reports of Bigfoot being physically solid, people seeing them at close range physically solid, there are many other reports of these things sometimes looking more foggy or misty, or part of the body is solid and other parts of the body are kind of transparent or kind of out of focus. You're getting all kind of really strange reports coming in with all kind of anomalies going on. It's just amazing what's going on. And I wrote about a lot of this back in the 70s, but now it's going on more and more. Some of the cases are getting stranger and stranger. I'm in touch with many people and researchers all across the country. They're getting similar reports now as well, and it's just fascinating. But would you like me to tell you about a couple of these really interesting cases?
Sure, go ahead. if one or two of those cases don't include the footprints that just disappear in the snow, that might be more of the interdimensional travel. How did it start? There's it's a pretty wide photo. No one could have jumped over to the side, just take a photo of just a narrow photo of the tracks. So I'm wondering about that too. But if you have a couple other examples you want to give, go ahead, Stan.
Well, I'll give you a couple because these two cases are pretty famous, and they're really, really well documented, and they take a little bit of time. So I'm giving you the shorter versions of it. But one of the most interesting cases that turned up when we began to realize that Bigfoot was much more unusual than just an unknown animal. It was during that massive wave in 1973. And my teams were out there day and night. I mean, we're out there on the scene. We're trying to stake out some areas where people claim these things are coming back. I mean, it was an amazing, amazing time period. But it was October 25th, 1973. I got a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown Barracks in Fayette County. He had just come back from investigating this multiple witness UFO landing on a pasture field in a pasture in rural area of Fayette County. And he said, I think there's a good chance of something still up here. Can you get a team up here as soon as you can? And we did. It was 10:30 at night, but we got a team together. We got our equipment. We got our radiation monitors and other equipment, and we found our way up into Fayette County. And basically the short part of the story is about 9 o'clock that night, yes, 15 witnesses observed us about 100-foot diameter red big ball just hovering low in the sky. It's hovering, but it's slowly moving downward towards the ground. The farmer's son, which would be the adult in this group, he's coming out to visit his family that owns the farm. He sees this thing in the sky, and people stand out there watching it. So he goes to a neighbor's to get a better view. And, yes, it looks like it's going to land on his dad's property. So there were two young boys at that other house, and they all decide, these three of them, they want to go up and see what this thing is. So they stop over his dad's farm, and the adult, the son, he grabs a .30-06 and a handful of ammunition. So those listening are probably know, a lot of people know a .30-06 is a pretty powerful weapon. He grabbed a handful of ammunition. He did not realize at the time he had two tracer bullets in that ammunition as well. So when you fire that tracer bullet, you just get that luminous trail. Anyhow, as they're riding down the farm road towards the pasture, the dogs around the area are going crazy. They hear this high-pitched whining noise and these baby crying sounds. And as they get closer, they make their way up towards the area where they're going to walk up towards the pasture. So they let their headlights on, and they kind of aim them up so they can see the path of where they're going. But they noticed, they thought it was strange that it looked like something was draining the power from their headlights, which they had never seen before. So anyhow, they make their way up to the top of the pasture, and they can't believe what they're seeing. About 250 feet away, here's this huge luminous object on the ground right above it. So now it's not a complete round, it's not a complete sphere, it's like a half a sphere. It's a big white dome, about 100 feet or so, again, either on the ground or right above the ground, making this loud whining noise. And they're standing there watching this thing, trying to figure out what this thing is. But then it gets more interesting. Their attention is drawn to a barbed wire fence about 75 feet away. And along that barbed wire fence are these two huge hair-covered creatures that look like a typical Bigfoot. The one in front is about 8 foot tall. The ones behind is about 7 foot tall. These things are covered with very long, dark, matted hair hanging off the body. They have no neck. They have large, luminous, glowing green eyes. The arms are so long they hang below the knees almost to the ground. They're kind of stooped and moving slowly, one behind the other. The big one's in front, and it's moving slowly along the barbed wire fence. And that one young boy, seeing this, he ran out of the field frightened. The other young boy yells to the adult, "Shoot him, shoot him." So the guy takes his first shot over their heads. That was the first shot with the tracer. There was no effect. But interestingly, this is where it gets interesting, when he fires that second tracer, the largest of the two creatures reaches out as though to grab that tracer and makes a loud whining baby crying noise, and that huge luminous object in the field vanishes. It doesn't take off and accelerate and rise from the ground. It just disappears. The sound stops, the luminosity, most of it's gone. The creatures turn around, start walking back along the fence line towards the woods. At that point, he's firing live ammo from his .30-06 at the creatures. Mainly was focusing on the big one with no effect on them whatsoever. So that's this is the short part of the story. So they run back to their vehicle to go back to the farm, told them what happened, take the family members to a neighbor's and call the state police. The trooper arrives 45 minutes later, and the witness said, look, just forget about it. You're going to think I'm crazy. And the trooper said, look, we had a report of two similar creatures on the mountain the night before. I have to investigate the incident. So they go up in the troop car up in the area looking for evidence. And the trooper told me, he said, when I got on the scene, the area where the object reportedly was on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said the farm animals wouldn't go anywhere near it. He said he shined his flashlight beam into it. He could barely see it. And he told me, he said, if I had a newspaper, I'm sure I could have crouched down and read the newspaper from the glow coming off the area. So, again, to make the story short, I was told they went back to the barracks. Both the trooper and the witness were taken to two separate rooms. They were separately interviewed, and then they called me to send my team up. And we don't have time to get into it. If you read Silent Invasion, you may remember some very, very strange things took place during the night up there. That's when we knew that we're dealing with something that's much, much stranger than an unknown animal. And when you hear these stories, I am not suggesting these things are coming from another planet. I'm not suggesting that Bigfoot, for example, is a pilot or passenger in a spacecraft from another planet. More and more data is we're dealing with something, again, that has a physical and a non-physical aspect to it. For lack of a better term right now, I'll call it interdimensional. But it was another case, among others, that really stands out. This is the case that really convinced me of that. It was February 6, 1974, in another part of Fayette County, way, way deep in the mountains. And it was a time period that some of your listeners probably will remember. There was big national trucker strike across the country. Everybody remembers there was gas rationing at the time. There was some violence across the highways with what was going on. So here in Pennsylvania, you had the National Guard and the state police patrolling together. You had some members of both teams that responded to this incident. I couldn't get gas in my hometown till early the next morning when I was up there the next morning with my team. Anyhow, so here's what happened briefly. Here's a woman who's been living in the mountains for years in a nice little cabin home deep in the mountains. So normal night she's sitting there watching television. She had some empty soda cans or pop cans on her little porch out front. Somebody was knocking the pop cans around. So she had a pack of wild dogs coming through about 2 or 3 weeks before. And she thought, well, I bet you the dogs are back. So she thought, I'll grab my 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun, I'll load one chamber, and I'll shoot over their head and scare them away. So she proceeds to do that. She loads her 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun. She walks up to the front. She turns on the switch for the outside porch light. She steps outside, but there's no dogs. 6 feet in front of her is a 7-foot-tall Bigfoot covered with kind of grayish hair. It put its arm straight up over its head when she turned the light on. And how did she react? She pulls the trigger. She said there's this bright flash of light, like the flash on a camera, and that huge hair-covered creature disappears right in front of her. But that's not the end of the story now. Her in-laws lived 100 feet away. They heard the gunshot. So they called to ask her what was she shooting at. She tried to tell them. Her son-in-law grabbed the sidearm, starts walking down that road, and I was told that he reportedly encountered 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, started shooting at her randomly, runs into the cabin, and it was around the same time they see this large luminous object like a big Christmas ornament hovering over the woods at the same time. That's when they called the state police for help. And I interviewed the primary investigator, and he said by the time they got up there, everything was over. But he said something very strange happened up there. He said, one, the witnesses were very credible. They were visibly very shaken. They gave great details about what happened. But he said what convinced them was the animal reactions. Now, I think I told you earlier, I have never seen a Bigfoot or a UFO, but I've seen the animal reactions on Bigfoot cases, even cryptid cases, many times over the years. It's been reported even this year in the last few years on cases here in Pennsylvania. And they had several big dogs. They had other farm animals as well. When they arrived on the scene, dogs would not make a sound. They wouldn't bark, wouldn't move. I remember him telling me, I can't remember if it was a German Shepherd or Eskimo Spitz, but one of those big dogs was in a cage, and he opened up and tried to pull that dog out, and the dog wouldn't even move. Should have bit his arm. And he said it was just amazing to see the animal responses. Now, when I got there early the next morning, all the dogs were barking again. That was the case among other reports we had, which indicated again that these things, believe it or not, seem to appear and disappear, could be in one location, even in daylight, momentarily disappear and reappear somewhere else. It was so bizarre. But now this is going on all over the country and around the world. We're getting similar reports. And I'm finding correlations now and similarities and patterns with other cryptid reports as well. So it's very, very fascinating. So getting back to the balls of light, you asked me about the mini UFOs, which I called them. So a lot of people hear them talking about the balls of light below the ground, the orbs of light, and, of course, the orb is something spherical. So, again, I knew about these cases in the 60s, but over the years, more and more, these cases are getting much more interesting, much more detailed. I knew about cases over the years where these things, even in daylight, were pacing vehicles on highways. I had reports of them entering people's homes and cars through open windows. I've had them, even in the last year, appear inside of people's homes. We've had incidents in the last few years, and again, daylight, where these things came within a few feet of people. And in 2022, we had the biggest surge of these cases ever documented anywhere in the country, around the world, in all across Pennsylvania, eastern PA, northern PA, all through southwest PA. Reports from numerous people describing encounters with these things. And I'll give you a couple quick examples. October 2022 up in Fayette County, 6 o'clock in the morning. It was a cold morning. This lady finds her husband sleeping on the front porch in his robe and slippers, which he would never do. And when she finally got him awake, he said, I went out to get the newspaper just been delivered. Here was this small, I think about a foot and a half diameter white sphere hovering right in front of him. He said he got very close to it, and he got so tired he couldn't stay awake, and he fell asleep. Then, interestingly, 3 days later, outside of Ligonier, up in the area again where we have multitudes of reports of all kinds of strange things for years, a woman awoke in her home around 2:30 in the morning to go to the restroom. She comes out of the bathroom. 5 feet away in her living room is this 1.5 to 2 foot diameter dark blue sphere with some kind of a dark mass inside of it just hovering there. She remembered, she said, I took one step towards it, and I felt like a slight electrical jolt. And then she said, I got so tired I couldn't stay awake, and I went back in the bed and fell asleep. She said the next day she felt very weak, very sickly, and she said, I'm an insomniac. I don't fall asleep like that. And why I fell asleep after being near this thing, I don't know. So we've heard other reports as well. So you had 2 cases, and there's been others we're aware of, where it was a similar physiological effect like that. So these cases are occurring more and more, just amazing stuff. I'll give you another example. When it was October last year, in the apartment building, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Again, all of these are good weather conditions. It's not a rare phenomenon. People talk about ball lightning. We're aware of that. That's not what these cases are. They're something completely different. So it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's 2 people sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV. Suddenly, 2-3 feet in front of them, this very small sphere, perfect round sphere, is just hovering in front of them. It goes up to about 4 feet and hovers there. And suddenly, 10 more of these similar little spheres suddenly appear. They're all moving around in about a 6-foot area right in front of them in the living room. Nobody had a camera nearby. And after a short time, these 10 objects vanished. The main object floated behind the television, and they never saw it again. That's just an example of what's going on. So just to give you a general idea of the descriptions that I found, In 72, we noticed the smallest reported were about the size of oversized fireflies. A lot of them are about the size of a golf ball to a baseball to about a foot or two in diameter. They're generally spherical, but not always. So they're generally bright luminosities of different colors have been reported. Sometimes we're seeing like a dark mass moving around inside of them, where people have been close to them. Let me think what else here. Generally, interestingly, even though they're very, very bright, they're not emitting any type of surrounding light, which is very common in a lot of the reports. And again, they have been seen more and more in daylight as well as at night. That kind of thing's going on. And then I have some reports over the years where these things have approached people at very close range in daylight, and they look solid and metallic looking. But most of the time, they're just luminous sources, generally spherical, but not always. So it's very, very fascinating. These cases have been going on more and more. We've had incidents last year. We have incidents in recent weeks. And now even the last few days, we're getting reports from widespread areas.
Okay, Stan, it seems somewhat related from your book, Silent Invasion, to some of the other examples, like the footprints in the snow that just suddenly stop. There's no indication of, the large creature, going in a different direction. You are wondering if it's interdimensional. And in a case from September 1st of 1973, you talk about there was a sighting, a mom and her young child had a sighting at near Latrobe, and she drove away to the family farm, and then there was like almost the same one there, however many miles it was. So if it was the same creature, how is it keeping pace with a car?
Well, I know. Okay, I remember that case, and I don't think it has anything to do with that. I know one thing. There's so many questions we have about these things we don't have the answers for. But this was not the only case. I remember that case very well. There was a mother and daughter, and there were a lot of sightings all around that area. So this is the Youngstown Cemetery, not far from Latrobe. There have been numerous sightings. It's right along the edge of the Chestnut Ridge in that area. There have been many, many Bigfoot sightings going on for weeks all around that area. And they were putting flowers on the grave, and they had been almost every night putting flowers on the grave. Somebody had passed away recently. And her baby's walking around. I think it was about 30, 35 feet away from her, just walking around, and baby was fine. And the mother's hearing in the distance a baby crying sound. She figured it was probably from one of the homes in the area. But a short time later, she hears louder cries, and I guess her baby is starting to cry. But anyhow, she happens to look up, and here standing on the edge of the woods is this huge, around 7-foot-tall Bigfoot, basically just looking at the child, and the mother sees this creature and runs over, grabs her daughter, and speeds out of there and goes to her dad's farm a few miles away. Within the hour, the same or a similar creature showed up. Somebody at the farm took a shot at it, and they didn't hit it. The animals were reacting. They called the state police. The mother and daughter were so scared the state police had to escort her home. But that wasn't the only case I had like that, and it's very rare. You don't hear about these very often. But during this big outbreak in 1973, a lot of strange things are being reported. So there was another incident happening between Greensburg and Chestnut in Westmoreland County with all this stuff going on. And this was at a home in a rural area where there's not a lot of homes around at the time. It was a very low foundation to the ground. And this woman was visiting friends, and I think it was around 3:30 in the morning, as I recall. She was in the bathroom, which was almost ground level. And so she's sitting there, and the window is directly in front of her. She was starting to hear these strange animal noises from outside, and suddenly this hideous face rises up from the ground, looking directly on the other side of the window right into her face. She described it looking more like a wolf or a dog, so some people think, well, it sounds like a dogman report, and who knows. But it was covered with hair. It had glowing red eyes, fang-like teeth, got a very good look at this thing. I mean, she was hysterical. And she ran out there screaming and yelling. They called the state police. She told them what happened. They phone patched her to me for me to interview her. They sent a trooper out to the scene, and he found some footprints out there as well. She was so scared and so upset that she asked the people to take her to her home a few miles away in Jeanette. Within the hour, the same or similar creature showed up at her house as well. Isn't that just amazing?
It is. And
there are so many aspects of Bigfoot that people have no idea about. There are so many weird things. You know, we talked earlier about these cases of UFOs hovering near vehicles and stalling out or losing power, the headlights dimming. Well, a lot of people don't know this, and it's quite rare, but I've investigated cases here in Pennsylvania, and we have them around the country. We have these EM effects also associated with some Bigfoot encounters. So, for example, when a car's riding down the road and suddenly a Bigfoot, in some cases, walking near the car, suddenly the car begins to stall out or lose power. And as the creature walks off, the power of the vehicle comes back on. That's something a lot of people never hear about.
Okay. Well, we have it's the UFO cases. That seems to have started with the Betty and Barney Hill case. So I think they had car problems as the craft was over them. So, yeah, that's been reported for over 60 years now.
Well, you've had these reports going back to, I believe I heard some late 40s, but I know in the early 50s you were hearing some of these around the country.
Even farther? Okay.
Yeah. That's when, some of the historical cases around the country that became public knowledge were involved in. So, yeah, they're interesting. There's all these EM effects. Here's what's going on in more recent years. You know, people say, how come you don't get any good UFO pictures? Well, we do. We do get some. We're lucky. We get some coming in. Other people are getting them. I've got some very good ones over the years. We've got some good videos in the last few months, in fact. And so we're getting phone photos. We're getting security camera, and we're getting game cam pictures coming in of different things. Some of them are pretty interesting. Some of them we can explain, because even with certain type of phones or certain cameras out there, there's certain things within the technology that create strange-looking lights or reflections, or you get lens flares, and a lot of things that we have people submit to us, we can explain. But there's some very interesting cases we cannot. And there's very similar type of videos, for example, showing up all across the country as well. So these things are quite interesting. But in more recent years, people are attempting to take photographs of low-level UFO sightings. So we've had a number of incidents like this, even in recent years, and some going back much further I can tell you about as well. But we had one case of a large black triangular object hovering quite low, moving over a witness's head. He had his phone camera, fully charged. He hits the video button. He's seeing the image on the screen on his phone. He thinks he's recording everything, and when he places back, there's nothing there. We have had other incidents where people have fully charged cell phones. They're aiming at the object, and moments later, their fully charged batteries completely drained the power. We're also hearing this with some pretty high-tech night vision equipment, or people trying to videotape the orbs low level, and the same thing's happening as well. It's not just one area. It's coming up from many different areas. We're getting similar reports, and that's pretty fascinating too. So there's so many stories. It's just incredible. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and hours and not even begin to get involved in what's going on. It's the more I said years ago, the phenomenon is so strange it protects itself. It is so bizarre and so unusual what's happening, but so many people reporting these things have no way of knowing about what other people are reporting. Similar reports come in, and quite often people who don't know each other will confirm other people's sightings. So that's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's what I really like about the Mothman story is you have the Scarberries and the other couple making their report, and around the same, within a couple following days, you have several other people making similar claims. And, well, there wasn't Facebook then and instant communications. So how do you have almost the same descriptions given by people who don't know each other? I just think that's really a fascinating look at, just say cryptids over the years.
Oh, yeah, and there's so many types of reports of these strange creatures coming in from so many people, and yet these people are so credible. Many people are very, very upset. A lot of people I interview are people who didn't believe any of these things till they had their own experience, and for them was life-changing. And many of these people had a hard time and still have a hard time dealing with some of these encounters they're reporting. And it's just incredible what's going on. But, talk about Mothman, I remember the reports breaking on the news in 66, 67. I'm cutting all the articles out of the local newspapers about it, made national news. But I'm hearing around that time, rumors that something similar is going on in the Pittsburgh area. But there was no way to track it down. There was no internet. There was no cell phones, no way to track these reports down. But years later, many years later, I came across two separate incidents, both from Allegheny County in the Pittsburgh area, that involved Mothman-type encounters. And I've written about both of them in a couple of my different books. But I think you said you read Creepy Cryptids, and there's a really good account in there, you might recall, of a Mothman encounter in the Pittsburgh area at the same time. It's, in fact, probably much stranger than the reports you heard from West Virginia. And so it's very, very detailed and very, very unusual. And a friend of mine, he became a friend of mine. He was an author, not in the UFO field, but he was best friend with this witness who was out on a date with a girlfriend. I'm not going to go into all the details right now, but apparently they had a very, very strange encounter with this thing. And this guy came to his house right after it happened in a state of shock. His face looked like it had been burned, and he ended up in the hospital that night. And it's a very intriguing report. But there was a lot of things going on in the 60s, when a lot of strange things were happening as well. And but apparently there was at least two cases I came across, and I interviewed witnesses who were involved in both of them. My friend interviewed the witness in one. I interviewed other witnesses who were involved in another incident around the same time period in the Pittsburgh area. And they were just fascinating reports. But there are so many strange reports coming in from things not just in the sky and on the ground, but even in the waterways around Pennsylvania. We get reports of strange creatures seen in the rivers and lakes of Pennsylvania. And, the government's interested in what they call transmedium objects. So they're interested in a lot of those sightings by Navy personnel, seeing these objects going in and out of the oceans. But here in Pennsylvania, for years and years, I've been talking about, you've got these objects going in and out of the rivers and lakes of Pennsylvania as well. And so that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, well, that was one of my questions I was hoping to get into is, we have the Great Lakes, about 3 hours away. We're by the lake effect snow, the glaciers. So, we our southwestern Pennsylvania, West Virginia's northern panhandle, it does have a connection to what goes on in the Great Lakes. We also have, for the people tuned in, and probably remember Three Rivers stadiums, and throw in the Youghiogheny, make it 4 rather extensive rivers in our area. So you do have a number of aquatic cryptids. What are people reporting from the local major rivers in our area? One was like described as a plesiosaur.
That's another thing. Well, everybody's heard about Nessie, but up around Lake Erie, they have what they call Bessie. So there have been reports going back to at least the 1800s of people seeing something pretty unusual, some kind of a sea serpent type thing. And if you live in Pennsylvania and you visit the Governor Ridge Center right near as you go into Presque Isle in Erie, the last time I was there, they had 2 or 3 different little exhibits on 2 things. One, on Bessie, the local sea serpent, and 2, a famous UFO incident that occurred on Beach 6 of Presque Isle on July 31st, 1966. And that's a very interesting case. I was able to get all of the complete Air Force file on this incident, which is pretty thick. And I've seen a lot of other reports have been done on it by different researchers. And it's an interesting case where it was July 31st, 1966 on Beach 6. So many people had probably gone there for vacation, didn't know they were actually on an area where there was alleged UFO landing. But what was interesting with this kind of mushroom-shaped thing was projecting a beam of light down to the woods and reportedly landed. And this small group of adults and children got stuck in the sand. They came down for a picnic. I'll just give you the really brief aspect of it. And when the one fellow went to get help because they were stuck in the sand, reportedly, after this thing fell, this object landed in the wooded area, something kind of a gorilla-like something reportedly came out of the woods and came up to the car and scratched the car. This made huge national, international news. And you got to remember now, 1966, the Air Force was still officially investigating UFO sightings. So you had a major from one of the local air bases who came out as a Blue Book officer to investigate the incident. That made a huge amount of news. And officially, that UFO incident has been listed as unexplained, but they basically just blew up the creature report. I'm not sure what to do with it, I guess. But that was a very, very interesting case. And there have been many sightings around that time. And since then, I investigated a number of incidents up in that area over the years since then. But there have been sightings up in that area for years. But, again, a lot of sightings here in the greater Pittsburgh area. We've had weird things seen in the rivers, under the rivers. I've had boaters report things, fishermen report things hovering over them, all kind of very, very strange things in the waterways as well.
Okay, and one of the topics that has kind of been touched on another show, but you have a chapter devoted to it is thurs. And that's like when the first settlers came to the area, they were here. They were had to be gotten rid of for protection of the livestock. Okay, so get that kind of thing going on, but it seems like there's been a resurgence of how do we explain that? Obviously, they never became extinct, but had they multiplied that much, or are they coming from somewhere else? What are you learning, or having reported to you?
Well, I think what you're discussing, we're talking about two different topics now. I think you're talking about mountain lions, cougars, that type of thing, which was common in Pennsylvania for years and years. And the Game Commission, of course, will tell you that people continue to see them, but they're misidentification. And I agree, there have been misidentification of mountain lion sightings. We know mountain lions exist. They were prevalent in Pennsylvania for years and years. I've had police call my teams out and investigate mountain lion sightings, and back years ago in Armstrong County, I made some great cast of mountain lion paw prints, which actually I think I have a picture of it in that book you're talking about. And
on page 132.
Okay, I don't remember, but I thought it was in the latest book. But anyhow, mountain lions are one thing that we know about them. They exist. That's not strange. Black panthers are much more unusual because we're talking about black leopards or black jaguars, an animal not common in this part of the world. But they've been seen in Pennsylvania for years and years, including many in recent years. I interviewed a hunter up in Somerset County last year. He said to me, I used to laugh at my friends who told me they saw a black panther. He said, you would never convince me till I saw it myself. And there have been many, many incidents of black panther sightings all over Pennsylvania, especially in the western PA areas. Sightings are right around Pittsburgh, the mountainous areas. People reported for years. I've had witnesses at some events I spoke at in the last few weeks told me they've seen them for years up in that area. But it's much more unusual. And I'm going to tell you a story now that you brought this up, but I'm going to tell you about a pattern. There's other things about Bigfoot a lot of people are not aware of. Sometimes when you have a localized outbreak of Bigfoot activity, like you're having with Skinwalker Ranch or whatever, so you got to remember, what I was dealing with in the 70s in Pennsylvania was Skinwalker-type activity, long before we knew about what was going on in Utah. And now you have locations like this all across the country where similar type of outbreaks are occurring, including here in Pennsylvania. But anyhow, on some occasions, you get reports of a Bigfoot accompanying another cryptid. So there's two different types of strange creatures. In some cases, when we have a localized outbreak, you get a Bigfoot outbreak with a Black Panther outbreak, for example. And one example was back in, my memory is 1979, on the border of Armstrong and Westmoreland County, then really enhanced in 1981 and 82. People reporting UFOs, strange lights in the sky and in the woods, weird footprints, screams and howls, balls of light, orbs low to the ground, all kind of, again, Bigfoot activity. But at the same time, all the Bigfoot reports are coming in, you had an outbreak of Black Panther sightings as well. So those are something that keeps showing up in places that they're not supposed to be. But I told you that story about the Bigfoot had vanished and disappeared when the lady shot at it. There have been other incidents somewhat similar. But let me tell you how there's a correlation with a Black Panther report. So in February 1983, way up in the mountains here in western Pennsylvania, guy's getting home from work. It's February of 83. It's cold morning. His car's overheating. He pulls into his driveway, and he goes in and gets the can of antifreeze. He comes back out, and he's putting antifreeze in the car. A few minutes later, he hears this loud growl. So about 20 feet away, he turns around. Here's this big black house cat sitting there just growling at him. Well, up there in the mountains where he is, there's stray cats all over the place. So he didn't think much about it. He goes back, putting more antifreeze in the car. A few minutes later, he hears this loud growling. It's even louder than before. He turns around and looks. He said, I couldn't believe what I saw. That big house cat has now physically grown to twice its size. And he said he threw the can at it, and it made a loud growl, and it turned around, started walking out the door, up the outside driveway, which was all well lit. He said, I ran into the house to get my pistol. He said, I came out a few minutes later, and he said, I couldn't really believe what I saw. He said, now I see an animal like I saw in the zoo. Looked like a big black panther with a long tail, had glowing yellow eyes. It was growling at me. He said, I took a shot at it. I didn't know if I hit it. Moments later, it just vanished right in front of him and disappeared and was gone.
Oh, okay. So they're shape-shifting, too.
Well, that's what we're hearing. And, again, we're hearing a lot of very, very strange things. And you may well be aware, if you've been watching the news, you're into the UFO information, what's going on. There's a new book out called Imminent by Lou Elizondo, and you're probably familiar with the name because he was a very high-level intelligence officer apparently involved in the secret Pentagon UFO program who broke his silence, and he talked a lot. He's been on radio and TV. Just in the last week or so, his new book came out. So he's very well known. There's been other whistleblowers. I understand another one is coming out, and he's going to be talking about his experience as well with the project. But in Imminent, in Lou Elizondo's book, and it just came out on the news in the last couple of weeks, but I read the book already, and he personally talks about that after he was involved in investigating this stuff, these green orbs of light, these balls of light, were appearing in his home, going up and down in the hallway that his wife and I believe children were seeing as well. So here you go again. You've got this connection now with these balls of light, the Bigfoot phenomenon and UFO phenomenon. And how it connects with the Bigfoot is historically in Pennsylvania and across the country, in areas where you have a lot of history of Bigfoot sightings, more and more reports are coming in of strange light phenomena or these small spheres of light low to the ground coming within feet of people in recent years. And there was an incident that's under investigation right now, just happened about a week ago. So there's a lot of things going on that the public is just not aware of, and it's very strange and very fascinating.
Okay, and you also have a close working relationship with Jim Brown. On your website, there's a video with Ron Lanham covering like a gray alien. Eric Altman helps you. Eric's a nice guy. I had a chance to meet him at a Bigfoot conference. Dan Hageman, we've been getting together with Dan. Dan's just a fantastic guy. I really enjoy what he does. But when you look at all of your colleagues who are contributing from their areas, what are some patterns you're seeing that goes from like Butler, Pennsylvania down to Charleston, West Virginia? Is there something emerging about animal behaviors or UFOs flying across the Appalachian Mountains or parallel with it? Is there some kind of pattern you're seeing from your colleagues that cover a wide area?
Yeah, I'm in touch with a lot of researchers. Some are pretty well known. A lot of them are just kind of quiet, working behind the scenes, and we're all getting reports. People don't realize how much of this is going on because you've got the major groups. You've got MUFON, National UFO Reporting Center, Center for UFO Studies, a lot of small independent groups, a lot of independent research. We're all getting reports. We can't even imagine how much of this stuff is going on and we're not aware of. I mean, like I said, I've been giving multitudes of lectures all year, and everywhere I go, people are coming up to me and telling me about recent sightings or sightings in past years. Almost none of them reported to anybody. This is huge. But when I'm in touch with people, and there's a lot of activity in West Virginia. There's been some significant things down there in the last few weeks and months that most people aren't aware of right now. And some really interesting cases. And it's similar to what we're getting here in Pennsylvania. Sometimes we see a correlation between those type of reports as well. And so one of the things, again, is the cylindrical objects are being reported in many areas, these wingless things, low level, that just in many cases vanish and they're gone. Very fascinating kind of reports. But, yeah, I mean, we do see patterns and similarities, and so we correspond quite a bit with a lot of different people out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Last weekend was the Uniontown Bigfoot campout conference. How did that go?
Oh, it was great. We had a great crowd. A lot of people came there from around the country. You had some of the well-known people involved in Bigfoot research from some of the TV shows were there. Ken Gerhard, which you probably have seen on TV, was an expert on thunderbirds and different cryptids. He was there speaking as well. I spoke, a number of other people. We had very good crowds. We talked to a lot of people, caught a lot of reports, and reportedly something may have happened up in that area that several people were involved in. I think it was on Friday evening. So I know they're looking more into it. They're still interviewing people, but I'm not going to get into it now. Like Eric, he'll bring that information out if he gets enough documentation on it. But there was some strange activity up in that general area that apparently several people did observe. So we'll see what happens. But sightings around that area have been going on for years and years. I mean, incredible sightings. That's up around, I believe it was Farmington. But there have been sightings around Farmington, Fairchance, Dunbar, Quebec Run. I mean, Fayette County, for whatever reason, is very, very active. But again, there's parts of Westmoreland, even Indiana County is very active as well. But every year we're getting just amazing incidents from Fayette County for some reason. And it's not just the ridge areas, other areas as well.
Okay, and this weekend is the Dairy Railroad Festival. Okay, so if you're not going to the Mothman Festival, you have the Dairy Festival to go to. You will be there. Can you tell us a little bit about where it's located? What you're going to be doing.
Well, it's quite an event. It's actually, this event has been going on for years in the borough of Derry. And that area right around Derry and Derry Township has historically been just a major hotbed for Bigfoot information for years and years in sightings. And the book you read, Solid Invasion, has many, many cases from 73 in that area. And there have been sightings, again, almost every year since then. And there have been a lot of weird things going up even this year. And so over the years, I spent many days and nights with my teams investigating and crawling through the caves up there and going all through the areas of woods for years and years. And we heard a lot of really, really spectacular things. I'm going to tell you once, let me finish what we're talking about. But anyhow, they've had what they call the Dairy Railroad Days for years. And now you have the Dairy Borough, the Borough of Dairy, that's very interested in this. And there's been a lot of news about what they're doing, but they're talking about maybe trying to set up a museum. But they're really interested in the history of the Bigfoot sightings in the area, and they're taking it seriously now. So anyhow, this event basically, it's basically almost 4 days long. It's Thursday night. They have a special event. It's more of a local event. But then Friday night and Saturday, they have events going on. They have many vendors, a lot of things going on. But then a lot of it is going to be towards the Bigfoot subject this year. So Friday evening, there'll be 3 speakers. You'll have Eric Altman, Ron Murphy, and myself speaking Friday night and Saturday night. But we'll be there all weekend, Thursday night, but we'll be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We'll have tables and display tables set up. We have our books available and DVDs. And we'll talk to a lot of people who have had a lot of sightings around there. We expect quite a big crowd because they always had a big crowd before, and this should bring a lot more people in. So if they go to my website under upcoming events, on my website, stangordon.info, there's links over to their website where you can get a lot more information about what's taking place.
Okay, and Derry is near Ligonier, is that right?
Derry is closest to Latrobe, PA.
Oh,
okay. It's close to Latrobe. So you got the Chestnut Ridge that just it circles that area around Derry, around Latrobe, over to Youngstown and Bagley, and it moves. And there's sightings been all around those areas for years and years of UFOs and Bigfoot and cryptid stuff. Quite a bit in the last few years, in fact. Everything from thunderbirds to a dogman sighting to other weird stuff is being reported. And I've interviewed a lot of these people. We've seen a lot of strange things out there. But let me tell you, now we're talking about that area. Let me tell you one other thing you probably never heard about Bigfoot before. And this is kind of fascinating. It's a very rare thing. It's more common out in the West. But there are some people who swear that a Bigfoot tried to mentally or telepathically communicate with them. I can tell you it's very rare here in Pennsylvania. I've only interviewed probably a handful of people who claim this has happened, but they are all credible, and they were very reluctant to even tell me that they believe these things were trying to mentally communicate with them. However, I was a witness to an event that took place along the Chestnut Ridge back in the 1980s. And this is really fascinating. A number of homeowners called me to come out. They lived at the bottom of the ridge, and this huge Bigfoot had been coming down to their property and scaring their animals. So they wanted to talk to us about what was going on. So I had a team went out to the area, and there was a small group of people there, some of the landowners who wanted to tell me about this thing coming down and scaring their animals around there. And one of the person in the group said very reluctantly, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know why it's going on, but it seems the time that this Bigfoot, this creature, is mentally telling me information. So we're out there interviewing people, and this person suddenly says, this creature is telling me right now that tomorrow morning, now where does this happen is Westmoreland County. It's telling her that tomorrow morning, about 15 miles away, near Homer City, and I think I mentioned that to you earlier, that's where that power plant was, where a lot of UFO activity, that tomorrow morning around Homer City, there'll be a very strange UFO incident tomorrow morning. And the next morning, I think it was around 3 o'clock in the morning, there were multiple reports coming in, a sound of a very weird, loud, strange sound, like something was hovering right over the town, but people couldn't see it, and they actually called the fire department out. So how do you explain that one?
I don't have an explanation. So that's do you think that would be the telepathy?
Well, that's what these people were claiming. They said these things were somehow they could hear the words in their mind. They could hear the words. They didn't know what else to call it, but telepathy. They couldn't even. Some people didn't use that term. They didn't know what to call it, but they just said this thing was somehow in their minds, in their head. It was trying to communicate with them.
Okay, if that was associated with, or it was in Mothman Prophecies, no. But are we finding that in other cryptid cases, or is this a very unusual report?
It's a very unusual report, but we have on occasion, and some of these go back years and years, and there's some people who claim that, again, that there was some type of telepathic communication, not necessarily with like a Bigfoot, but something else going on. And it's again, this is so bizarre, it's so unusual what's going on. A lot of it just, there's patterns to some of it, but a lot of it just doesn't make any sense, which I think is why it's so hard for people to believe until they had their own experience, until they've had this directly happen to them. It's very hard for people to accept. But people more and more researchers now in the Bigfoot field who used to laugh at these stories back years ago, they're starting to get these reports. Some of them are experiencing things now. A lot of these people are seeing these orbs of light close by in the woods they're examining. They're having EM effects involving malfunction of their equipment when they're trying to take photographs. So more and more people in this field are now beginning to realize there's something very strange happening.
Okay. I think it's fascinating. You learn more, get other examples. Please come back and tell us. I think that's just a fascinating subject. And okay, you've touched on like a Mothman type sighting happening closer to the Pittsburgh area. I think one of the aquatic cryptids was not just down the Mon from the Point, Golden Triangle. But are you seeing that there are more of the cryptid reports coming in populated areas?
Oh, yeah, we are. We're seeing more reports. We've had Bigfoot sightings. I mean, even going back, a lot of people didn't know this, even going back to probably around 1975, we had an incident reported in the suburb of Philadelphia one afternoon where something, a small hair-covered upright creature, when I say small around, I believe around 5.5 foot tall, was seen walking down the road. And it made a lot of news at the time. And we've had other reports from many of the suburbs around the Pittsburgh area. We've had sightings all around Allegheny County, even in recent years, very close-range, detailed reports. And, I mean, some of these cases we have, I know it's really hard for people to believe and see, but some of these cases, these people were 5, 10, 15 feet away from these creatures. I'll give you a great example. And
okay.
And actually, you probably have read it in Creepy Cryptids, but this was an incident that happened just several years ago down in the Mon Valley. So the Mon Valley is probably about 40 miles from Pittsburgh. So the Mon Valley is basically a lot of these small little towns that border along the Monongahela River down in the Mon Valley area. There have been incidents for years. There was a lot of activity during that 73 Bigfoot outbreak in the Mon Valley. There have been Bigfoot sightings, thunderbird sightings, weird things in the river, all kind of weird stuff for years and years down in that area. But a few years ago, Eric Altman actually went out to investigate this. This was a fella. It was a real heavy, rainy night, as I recall, and he was riding down this 2-lane road. And I think the short part of the story was that his headlights hit something standing on the left side of the road. I think he put his high beams on, and this huge, at least 7 foot tall, huge Bigfoot with glowing red eyes literally stepped out in front of his vehicle, literally 5 feet in front of him. It was so close, he couldn't see the lower part of its legs because the car was blocking that part of it. And, I mean, this thing looked right at him. He looked at it. It looked at him. He saw this thing right down to its hands. And here's the interesting thing. So as he's watching this thing turns and starts with big leaps, starts running around like this little hill right across the road. And he's seeing this whole thing. He grabs his cell phone to get ready to take a picture. He's right behind this thing in his car. He has it in his headlights. He goes to take a picture, and he said, all of a sudden, it's gone. He said, I couldn't explain it, but he said, it was right in front of my car. I'm getting ready to take a picture, and it's nowhere to be seen. And these are the kind of things we hear every once in a while from people. These things that suddenly appear, they suddenly disappear. And they just come out of nowhere. So a lot of the reports we've had over the years is these things don't, for example, start at the right side of the road or highway. They just suddenly appear in the middle of the road where they should have seen them crossing. They see them from head to toe. They give great description, and then they're just gone. People tell me they sound like watching a Predator movie. They can't believe what they're seeing. Those are the kind of things going on. And I think earlier you wanted me to talk about – yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, yeah, it's a very appropriate analogy. Go ahead with your story. You're a fantastic storyteller. Keep going.
So I think you mentioned about one of the winged entities or something, not a Mothman, but one of the most famous cases was back in March of 2011 up around East Brady in Butler County. And I got to know this witness's family very, very well. We still keep in touch. Very professional, very educated person. And this guy was coming home late at night. He's riding down this road. His headlights catches something on the right side of the road in the field. He thought it was a deer. until it suddenly rises up from the ground, takes 3 big steps across the road in front of his vehicle and gone into the woods. Got a great look at this thing, and he said to me, when I interviewed him first, he said, I've heard stories of Bigfoot. He said, this thing was not a Bigfoot. He said, this thing's at least 8 foot tall, and actually was a little taller from what we could tell. He only saw it from the one side. It never looked at him. But he said this thing had light leathery skin on the body. The head was kind of shaped like a aerodynamic helmet. The eyes were swept back. It had claws for hands. And most interestingly, it had wings tucked into its back. And he got a very good look at this thing. And within the next few days, and you can ask Dan Hagman about it, because Dan got several other similar reports within the same area within the next few days from other people.
Okay, is that the Butler gargoyle?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and then we're back to also on the same page 111 or I'm sorry, 118. You also get numerous people reporting leathery skin, they look like bats. So there you go. People who don't know each other are calling you, and you're getting, kind of like the same descriptions of, flying humanoids or pterodactyls or something.
Yeah, well, with the thunderbirds, again, as we mentioned, there's several different categories. And one of them is like a very large black, leathery bat-like creature. And they've been seen in many different areas. There was an incident, maybe 2008. I think Jim investigated it down in Washington County on a major highway where this huge, leathery, bat-like thing came down within 20 feet of cars on the highway, and people were pulling off the highway looking at this thing. And we've always tried to find this guy, but apparently somebody was staying outside of her car taking photographs of this thing, but whoever it was, we never heard from him. And, if he has pictures, we sure like to see them.
Okay, that one almost sounds like the same behaviors as the Mothman chasing the Scarberry's car, but we get into that later. It's like the 7 minutes or so we have left. We need to touch on the huge spider story. I like that one.
Well, let me tell you. Not too many creatures bother me. I'm out in the woods all the time for years and years, and snakes don't bother me, lizards don't bother me, but I don't like spiders. And when I interviewed this person, two people that were involved in this case, it was definitely one of the creepiest reports I've ever heard. And these type of reports are so completely uncommon. Most people have never heard about them. But I remembered I had notes that I'd taken back in early 1970s. And one of them was there were 2 reports I remember within days of each other from Butler County. And people reported seeing these gigantic, but listen to this, they weren't just gigantic spiders, they were gigantic metallic spiders crossing a road. And I remember getting 2 different reports from different people within days of each other reporting the same thing. And then also I had a notation in my file from February 75 from a well-known researcher from Ohio. And he had a report of a giant spider, they said like a daddy long legs, crawling across the road in front of a car. And the witness said it looked like an actual living creature, but it was just huge. Those are the only reports I've ever heard like this. But this case was really amazing. And this person, how they got a hold of me, I believe I was doing a interview a few years ago on KDK Radio in Pittsburgh on these topics. I was getting a lot of calls, and this person said, I was really interested to hear your program. You're talking about a lot of strange things, but you didn't bring up what we saw and experienced. And she goes on to tell me, and I've met these people several times in person, and she believed it was the spring or summer of 2014 in rural Indiana County. And anyhow, as I recall, and I'll read a little bit from the book because there's so many details. Her and her friend just happened to go outside and was working around the yard, and they turned around, and about 6 feet away from her mobile home, she said, we couldn't believe what we're seeing. Crawling up over the door and part of the window near the door, she said she going to describe as a gigantic spider that was gray in color. She said that, and she drew me a great diagram. You can see it in the book. She said the door was about 6 feet tall. Mm-hmm. The spider was longer than the door. She said the giant spider was nearly 7 foot in length. She's described the body was about 4 inches wide. The legs were shiny. The back legs were almost twice the length as the side legs. And she yelled in her French, said, "My God, what are we going to do?" Neither one of them had a camera or a cell phone at the time, unfortunately. And she said, "We got to do something because this thing might hurt somebody." So her friend grabbed a long, sturdy piece of wood to smash this thing, and they thought, well, if we kill it, we'll pick up all the blood and all the material, and we'll take it somewhere and see if we can figure out what this thing is, because we never heard anything this big before. So he smacks this thing, I believe it was twice in the center area of the body. But here's where it gets really weird and how it fits in with some of the other cryptid cases we have. He struck this thing, and she said it looked like a huge overgrown daddy long legs. But then it seemed to suddenly just disappear in front of their eyes as it fell to about a foot from the ground. She said they couldn't understand what happened. They said they looked all over the ground. There's no signs of fluid, blood, residue from that huge spider. They kept talking out loud like it's vanished. Where did it go? I swear it just vanished. Those kind of comments they were making. And anyhow, here's the other detail that's really interesting, because these things show up in some of the cases we're investigating with hunters in the woods, with Bigfoot and cryptid encounters. It's as though there's some amazing change in the local environment, or things are happening with the people involved. It's again very, very bizarre. She said during the time they're seeing this thing, the sun was just coming up, but there was a bright yellow glow that seemed to come from behind the two witnesses that was illuminating the whole area. But they said they seemed confused because the glow, they couldn't figure out where the glow was coming from. And she said the surrounding area looked and felt different during the time they saw the spider. That everything looked beautiful around them, like it was being in paradise for a short time. Everything just looked completely different. And anyhow, after this was all done, they went inside looking up spiders on the encyclopedia about spiders in Pennsylvania and realized there was nothing even close to the size of this thing they saw. But it was a very, very fascinating case. And it's something you just you hardly ever hear about a case like that. And they were quite frightened and very, very detailed.
Okay, I'm glad we had a chance to discuss it to close the show. And, Stan, we have, I don't know, like maybe 90 seconds. Go ahead and plug your websites, and we're going to be out of time.
Yeah,
but,
I appreciate
that.
Thank you. My website is stangordon.info, stangordon.info. There's contact for my phone numbers on there. People can reach me at area code 724-838-7768. My emails are on there. One of the easiest one is paufo@comcast.net. All my books, the newest book, again, is Creepy Cryptids and Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania. I have Silent Invasion, about that massive Bigfoot UFO wave in '73 with amazing cases in there, astonishing encounters, and really mysterious Pennsylvania. They're all first-hand investigations, case where people were physically close to Bigfoot and UFOs. So all the books are available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, and you'll find my books in at least some of the Barnes & Noble stores I know carry them.
Okay, and you'll be at the Dairy Festival over the weekend, too.
That's correct. So if people go to my website and look under upcoming events, I have a lot of events on there for the next few weeks, but there's more I'm going to post for the end of the year. I'm already getting calls for a lot of events for next year. Just the public interest around here is just amazing. So there'll be more, but they can keep going to the website, and I'll be updating it.
All right. Thank you so much, Stan. This has been a real honor to have you as a guest, and we'll have to do this again. And we'll see everyone tomorrow night as well. Thanks again, Stan.
Hey, it is Ryan Seacrest. There's something so thrilling about playing Chumba Casino. Maybe it's the simple reminder that with a little luck, anything is possible. ChumbaCasino.com has hundreds of social casino-style games to choose from with new game releases each week. Play for free anytime, anywhere, for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. Join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Gallatin Center for Rehabilitation and Healing is a state-of-the-art subacute and skilled nursing center proudly serving Sumner County with a 5-star quality measures rating from CMS. Leading Sumner County with their innovative rehabilitation techniques as well as their signature programming, such as the Comprehensive Amputee Rehabilitation Program and concierge services to support those throughout their healing journey. Gallatin Center provides a personalized brand of care to ensure your stay is both healing and restorative. Learn more at GallatinCenterRehab.com. We start where others stop.